and refuse to let me sink under the pressure. You meant for me to soar, I am your child.
WVTC Radio Detroit. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, our website, www.wvtcradio.com, or download our WVTC app from the Play Store for Android users and the App Store for iPhone users. Thank you for tuning to WVTC Radio Detroit and the Community Bell Show with your host, former Wayne County Commissioner Edna Bell. Stay tuned for insightful information Detroiters will find valuable. Text a friend and tell them to watch with you for news you can use. And now, your host, Edna Bell.
Everybody, this is your man P&A, and we just come to give you a message. Look to the hills, your help is up there. Let's go. Got some news on the other day. Working hard, not gonna get a raise. At a loss for what you say, and it hurts so badly. When I left, I was feeling down. Lost my marriage and it broke me down. Now I'm here on the rebound. It used to hurt so badly. The reason why I lift my head, I remember what the writer said. To get my help, I do this instead. Hey, if you believe in God, this is what we do. When I'm sad, when I'm mad, and I don't understand. When I'm low, when I don't know which way to go. Woo.
You did all that you could do. He still walked away from you, and now you have an attitude. Baby daddy acting real confused. Why you don't wanna produce? And the kids don't have a clue, and it hurts so badly. The reason why I lift my head. Remember what the writer said.
To get my help, I do this instead. Sometimes you just gotta hold your head up. When I'm sad,
Look to the hills.
when I'm mad,
I do.
and I don't understand.
Look to the hills.
Yeah.
Look to the hills.
When I don't know
What a good Lord, which way to go?
So when I'm sad,
And when I'm mad,
and I don't understand. From the ATL and worldwide, keep your head up, keep your eyes up, look to the hills. That's where your help is. Monique, we made it.
Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. It is a wonderful, wonderful Monday afternoon. And if it's Monday at 4 o'clock, it must be the Community Bell Show. Welcome to WVTC Gospel Detroit and the Community Bell Show. We are so happy to have you with us this afternoon. Well, this is another edition of Black History Month with Community Bell. And today I am just so honored to be able to celebrate somebody I have known all my life, somebody who's very, very special. My brother, Ted Talbert. Now, I'm going to start way back with Ted Talbert. I'm going to go back and then bring you all the way up to where we are now. But let's start with where we grew up. We grew up in a place called Royal Oak Township. Now, most people are not going to know what the devil Royal Oak Township is or where it is. Well, since you don't know, let me tell you. Royal Oak Township is the southernmost township in Oakland County. Probably the only black township in Oakland County, southern Oakland County. It goes from 8 Mile on the south to what we used to call the North End on the north. When we lived there, and that would have been back in the 40s and 50s and early 60s, there were projects. There were the white projects, there were the brown projects, and there were the two-story projects. And for any of you who grew up out there or who know anything about that, you know what I'm talking about. The white projects were closer to 8 Mile, and they were white in color. That's the only reason they were called white. The brown projects were the second ones, and they were brown in color. And then the two-story projects were in the back, and they were 2 stories. Very, very simple. But I've got to tell you, it was probably one of the best places to grow up you would have ever had. We were safe. We were poor and didn't know it because everybody was in the same situation. But it was a caring community. It was a nurturing community. It was a community who took care of itself and each other. The school in Royal Oak Township was George Washington Carver Elementary School. And everybody walked to school because it was close enough and the area was small enough so that we could indeed walk to school. And so we walked to George Washington Carver Elementary School every morning, came back every afternoon. We happened to live right across the street from the school. So needless to say, you know, there was no, oh, I got caught up at school or I walked by my girlfriend's house. You got out of school, you came right home. And you were home in 10, 15 minutes after school let out because you lived right across the street from the school. George Washington Carver Elementary School was K through 8. As a matter of fact, they had to build a new addition because there were so many children at that time. And so in the 50s, they built a new addition to George Washington Carver Elementary School. We had great gym, we had music, we had art, we had dance, we had science. We had everything a school should have. We had home ec. The boys had shop. It was a great place to grow up. And all of our teachers were African American. It's probably one of the few places in the whole metropolitan Detroit area at that time where the entire school system was African American. The principal, Miss Long, tall, dark-skinned lady who ruled with an iron fist, but she made sure everything was taken care of properly. The assistant principal was Mr. Satterwhite, tall, handsome young man, also took care of business, ruled with an iron fist, but everybody knew that they were loved and protected at George Washington Carver Elementary School. So that's where we went to school. George Washington Carver Elementary School. My brother Ted Talbert and myself and all of our friends went to the same school. When we graduated from George Washington Carver Elementary School, we went to Northern High School. Now you might say, well, why in the world would you go all the way down to Northern High School? Well, because in those days, segregation was alive and well. And even though we could have walked to schools in Oakland County, they would not allow us to go to those schools. And so every morning, 9, and in those days we call them DSR buses. You call it DOT now. It was Detroit Rail Service in those days, DSR. Picked us up in the morning, took us to Northern High School. Now, we passed Mumford High School that we could have walked to also. We passed Central High School. We passed McKenzie High School. We passed all of even Highland Park High School. But we passed all those schools, and we were bused to Northern High School. It was quite incredible. So we knew about busing long before everybody started raving about busing and talking about busing. And oh my goodness, how could you bus those children that far? They bused us and nobody said a word. But you know what? I'm not sure it was all bad. We got a great education at Northern High School. We made lifelong friends at Northern High School. And the interesting part about it is that we have those friends today. But the children who came from Royal Oak Township and went to Northern High School excelled in everything. They became the president of the graduating classes. They became members of the National Honor Society. They became members of the sports teams. They became members of the student council. They became members of the Northern Light, which was the paper, the school paper. So the young people who graduated from George Washington Carver Elementary School and went on to Northern High School did exceptionally well, exceptionally well. And because we're talking about Ted Talbert today, my brother, who also was a student at Northern High School, he became the president of his graduating class. He played baseball. And his experiences at Northern High School led him to get involved in history. He loved reading about history. He loved going to the library and reading about history. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean he did a lot of homework, because he didn't. I used to get very, very upset because he would do his homework in study hall. And so by the time he got home, he was done, and I was still studying. I got all good grades, but I had to study very, very hard to get those good grades. He didn't. He got good grades without doing a whole lot of studying. But he was really just a great guy to be around. So Ted Talbert, my brother, graduated from Northern High School. He and a group of his friends decided they wanted to go to California and go to college. So they got together, they piled up in the cars, they drove out to California. They stayed out there maybe a year or two, and then they were back. But the good news is they did, and even in those days, have a thirst for learning, a longing to do something different. And that's what got Ted Talbert involved in videos and filmmaking and history. He was a history buff. He absolutely enjoyed African American history, learning about people of our day and prior days. And that's why you're going to hear what happened and how he got to where he got. And you may see in front of me these two ladies, these two gold ladies. They are two of his Emmys. He was a writer, director, producer, and he won 5 Emmys. I only brought 2 with me today because they're very heavy, but he won 5 of them. And I have them sitting here in front of me today because I wanted you to see the reflection of his work. And it isn't just that I thought he was great. Obviously, a whole lot of other people thought he was great too, because he won Emmys. He worked for both all Channel 2, 4, and 7. He had a talk show where his co-host at the time was our former mayor, Dennis Archer. And it was an interesting talk show. They talked about current affairs. They talked about things that were going on in Detroit, Michigan, and in the nation. But he came up with all sorts of innovative things to do and to talk about and to relate history, the history of our community. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that after this next song, but I want you to get ready to hear about Ted Talbert, Emmy Award-winning Ted Talbert, and how he won his Emmys, what the Emmys were for, and the other kinds of things he did. So listen to this song, and then we're going to come right back.
Well. Said it's just another day. 'cause you always protect me. It's because of who you are, not because you always bless me. You need to count all your blessings with me. 1, 2, 3, for me. When everybody turn their backs on me, I can't believe the way I was deceived. But that's okay because you're here with me. And Lord, I just can't live without you. When I wake up in the morning, I am on my mind. When I put my face on you, I am on my mind. Well, when I'm sitting in traffic, I am on my mind. Every time it don't matter, it's the same 'cause I got it in my mind. Keep staring at me because I'm stuck in a daydream. When I think about your goodness, Lord, I forget that the lights screen. Your love gets sweeter and sweeter every day. Like some cake and some ice cream. Can't believe you took the time just to say a little for me. When everybody turn their backs on me, I can't believe the way I was deceived. But that's okay because you're here with me. And Lord, I just can't live without you. When I'm doing my dishes, y'all, when I'm getting my hair and my nails done, you came through for me like no one else did. Day or night, doesn't matter, it's the same color. Got it on my heart. When you say me coming, I got him on my mind. You don't have to worry about a thing. You don't have to worry about a thing. Every day of the week, yo. Yeah. Got him on my mind. Yes, I do. Got him on my mind. Got him on
Okay, I'm back. To complete honoring our Black History Month program person today, that is my brother, Ted Talbert. Now, again, as I talked to you earlier about Ted Talbert, we grew up in Royal Oak Township, went to George Washington Carver Elementary School and Northern High School. Ted became president of his graduating class and won the Detroit Police Youth Award for an outstanding student that year. And in those days, when you won that award, for those of you who might remember, the Sheraton Cadillac, which is now the Weston Book Cadillac, was the hotel to be. I mean, that was the place. And so all the young people who won the Detroit Police Youth Award, there was one from each school, one boy, one girl from each high school. They were presented with their awards at a dinner at the Sheraton Cadillac. They were presented at their awards from the mayor at the time. Beautiful dinner. Their parents were allowed to come. It was really quite an honor and quite a wonderful occasion. And so he won the Detroit Police Youth Award that year, and that would have been in 1961. As a matter of fact, in those days, it was January 1961, because in those days we graduated in January and June. The January graduating classes were obviously much smaller, but we graduated in January and June. I graduated in January 1962. He graduated the previous year in January 1961. And they probably stopped doing the January graduating classes, I want to say probably mid 60s, 64 maybe. We might have been one of the last few classes who graduated in January in those days, and they pushed everything to June, and so all the graduations were in June. But we did graduate in January in those years. So last time we were here, before we left for the break, I told you about Ted having won Emmys. He won 5 Emmys, 5 of them. He won his Emmys for programs that he wrote and produced at one of the channels, 2, 4, or 7. I'm not going to try and remember which ones, but I want to say that he probably won most of his Emmys when he was at Channel 4, because that's where he was when he passed. My brother passed in January of 1999, 2013. January 2013. That's when my brother passed, but had a great life. And in a minute, you'll begin to see some pictures that will come up on the screen. But during his time, he created something called the Joe Louis Video Memorial Room. The Joe Louis Video Memorial Room was located in the, at that time, Joe Louis Center, now the TCF Center. It was a room that was given to him by the late Coleman Alexander Young. And as long as the center was there, and before they did the new renovations, that room was dedicated to Joe Louis. There were all kinds of Joe Louis artifacts in the room. There was always an event on Joe Louis's birthday in the room. We had an event called the Brown Bomber Jacket that my brother Ted created. And the Brown Bomber Jacket was an event that was given to prominent people in the community who had done things to further the African American community and to further good things in this community. The last time the Brown Bomber Jacket was given was in 2012, which would have been in the year prior to Ted's passing. And I'm going to give you a few of the people who received the Brown Bomber Jacket, because you will know all of them. But in 2012, the last Brown Bomber Jacket was given. And the people who received the Brown Bomber Jacket in those days, it was Catherine Blackwell. Catherine was an educator and a community activist. Reverend Joseph Lowry, and all of you know that he was the co-founder of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Dr. Stephen Chenault. Now, Stephen was an author, an educator, a historian, just a great guy who lived in this community, supported this community for years and years and years. And we all know Greg Mathis, a TV host and former 36th District Court judge. Greg Mathis has done so much to support this community through his young life. He has done things all over the place. I used to sit on a board of directors with him before he became a judge, while he was still an attorney. But Greg Mathis, also Juanita Moore. Juanita at that time was president of the African American Museum, the Charles H. Wright African American Museum of History. And Jim Thrower. Now, for those of you who don't know, Jim Thrower is a businessman, but he was also a Detroit Lion, an outstanding Detroit Lion. So he played football, but he is still a businessman in this community, has supported this community. He and his lovely wife and his entire family have been in this community, supported this community. He's an owner of several McDonald's, not only here, but across the country, here and in New Orleans. The Brown Bomber Jacket Awards were given to those people the last time in 2012. And that is something we're going to work on recreating, the Brown Bomber Jacket, to be given to other persons in the community who have done the kind of work that many of the people that you will see. The other person on this list who received the Brown Bomber Jacket that year was Mike Ilitch, owner of the Red Wings and the Tigers and Little Caesars and the Fox and all of those. Mike Ilitch also received the Brown Bomber Jacket that year, and it was such a blessing because Mike had been ill, and he was ill but he did come to the Brown Bomber Jacket ceremony. He and his wife and his family, and he was very gracious. there was something else we gave out, and Ted created this also. It is the Sonny Wilson Spirit of the Champ Awards. Now, for those of you who don't know, Sonny Wilson was quite a businessman in the city of Detroit. Sonny owned a bar in the city of Detroit. He owned a hotel. Sonny had a bowling alley. Sonny Wilson did all sorts of wonderful things in the city of Detroit. And so the Sonny Wilson Spirit of the Champ Awards were given out to Nathan Conyers and to Norman Thrasher. Nathan Conyers, of course, owned Conyers Ford, then left Conyers Ford and became a Jaguar dealership. He's a brother of the Honorable John Conyers, so they've been friends of our families for years and years. And Norman Thrasher, a community activist, but also an entertainer. And so Norman Thrasher and Nate Conyers received the Spirit of the Champ Awards in 2012, the last time they were given. But you'll see on the screen in a little while, you will see a booklet that looks like this one. These were the programs for the Brown Bomber Jacket Awards and for the Sonny Wilson Spirit of the Champ Awards. They were great events. The events were held at wonderful locations, and they had lots and lots of community support. And so you'll see those. But let me show you some other things that I want you to know about from Ted Talbert. Ted Talbert was quite a young man. Now, the Joe Louis Spirit of Detroit Award, well, actually it was a Brown Bomber Jacket Award. One of the first ones was given to Willie Horton, Barry Sanders, Dr. Arthur Johnson from Wayne State University and the NAACP, Hilmer Kente, who was a boxer, Dorothy Mann, who was a community activist, and Reverend C.T. Vivian, who was a civil rights activist and an author. And I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to be in the room with all those people of history, because many of them have gone on to be with the Lord now. But what they have done, what they have left this community will never, ever be forgotten. So tell Ted Talbert and his Emmys that you see in front of you. So he won 5 Emmys, as I said, and like I said, that only brought 2 because they're too heavy to carry all of them around. But he won Emmys for Letterman of the Law, Building Bridges Over Troubled Waters, Dinah and Train, A Love Story, and Still the Champ, and An Eagle Should Fly. Now, Letterman of the Law was a historical documentary about African Americans who went to University of Michigan and other universities, but who also played sports. And it highlighted many of those many judges that we now know, because Letterman of the Law, they became attorneys and they became judges. Building Bridges Over Troubled Waters. That one had to do with churches and ministers in the area. The Reverend Franklin is in that one. We have so many special ministers in our community, but Building Bridges Over Troubled Water was an excellent presentation. Now, Dinah and Train. Again, let's go back to some history. Dinah and Train, who was Dinah? Dinah Washington. Who was Train? Night Train Lane. Night Train Lane played football for the Detroit Lions. He and Dinah Washington had a love affair to beat all love affairs. They were wonderful together. And so my brother produced and wrote a story and won an Emmy for his presentation, Dinah and Train, A Love Story. And people probably don't even remember that, but I'm glad to be able to just remind you of some of those things. And Still the Champ. And Still the Champ also won an Emmy. And Still the Champ was about Joe Louis. It chronicled Joe Louis and the fight between he and Max Smelling. And for those of you, again, let me do a little bit of history now. Back in the 40s, World War II, Max Smelling was a German. Joe Louis, of course, was a boxer, American boxer. But the fight was, it was called the fight of the century back then because Muhammad Ali hadn't started fighting yet. So this one was called the fight of the century. And when Joe Louis beat Max Smelling, it was heard around the world. In those days, we didn't have a television, I want you to know. So everybody sat on the porches listening to the fight on the radio. And you could just hear everybody shouting across this city and across the nation when Joe Louis knocked Max Smelling out. And so, and Still the Champ is the story of the fight between Joe Louis and Max Smelling and what history that made. And then the fifth Emmy was An Eagle Should Fly. Again, let me go back to a little history for you. Back in the 1940s during World War II, black pilots, and we did have black pilots, were known as the Tuskegee Airmen because they all trained in Tuskegee, Alabama. Mayor Coleman Young was a Tuskegee Airman. When we were in high school, we had a teacher who was a Tuskegee Airman. His name was Richard Macon. And of course, we're in high school in the late 50s, early 60s. And we had this math teacher, and he was a math teacher, telling us how he flew bombers, he flew planes, and how they protected the bombers when they were flying. And, you know, unfortunately, in those days, we didn't have the kind of history taught that we should have taught. So we kind of did believe him, but we said, okay. He would give us these problems that said, you know, if the plane leaves at one time, the train leaves at another time, and one's going this speed, the other one's going that speed, you know, who's going to get there first, or what time are they going to get there? And he was a great math teacher. Great math teacher, taught geometry and algebra, great math teacher. His name was Dick Macon. He was a Tuskegee Airman. And out of that relationship from high school, when my brother met this guy in high school, and he was our teacher, he went and did everything he could to find everything out about the Tuskegee Airmen, and he wrote and produced the video, An Eagle Should Fly, and he won an Emmy for that video. And it's a wonderful, wonderful video. An Eagle Should Fly chronicles the exploits of the African-American pilots who were Tuskegee Airmen. And the nice part about it, every year when he would do it, he would show that film after he won the Emmy. One year we went to Northern High School, and the Tuskegee Airmen came also in their beautiful royal blue jackets, and they were introduced to the students at Northern High School. And the students were allowed to ask questions and have conversations with these heroes of World War II. And it was such a wonderful, wonderful presentation. And I remember going to one of those, and I was sitting in the back watching Ted go over all of the things he did to produce An Eagle Should Fly. And a young man was sitting near me, and I heard him say to his friend, "Gee, I sure would like to be like him when I grow up." That just almost brought me to tears, because to think that my brother, who went to Northern High School, is now inspiring other young people to want to do some of the things that he did. I mean, it's just it's a wonderful feeling. And so those are the 5 videos that he won Emmys for: An Eagle Should Fly, and Still the Champ, Dinah and Train, A Love Story, Letterman of the Law, and Building Bridges Over Troubled Waters. And when we come back, I've got some more information I'm going to share with you about my brother, Ted Talbert.
I dedicate this song to recession, depression, and unemployment. This song's for you.
Today's a new day, but there is no sunshine. Nothing but clouds, and it's dark in my heart, and it feels like a cold night. Today's a new day, but where are my blue skies? Where is the love and the joy that you promised me? Tell me it's alright.
I'll be honest with you.
I almost gave up, but I'll pass.
gonna be when this is over?
Even though I hurt, see, I smile. I know God is working, so I smile. Even though I've been it for a while.
What you do?
I smile.
Come on and
Smile. It's so hard to look up when you've been down. Sure would hate to see you give up now.
God's people.
You look so much better when you smile. So smile.
Now every day ain't gonna be perfect, but it still don't mean today don't have purpose. Come on.
Today's a new day, but there is no sunshine. Nothing but clouds, and it's dark in my heart, and it feels like a cold night.
It ain't easy, but
Today's a new day, but tell me, where are my blue skies?
where is that love, y'all?
Where is the love and the joy that you promised me? Tell me it's alright.
The truth is,
I almost gave up, but a power that I can't
that
explain
Holy Ghost power, y'all.
fell from heaven like a shower down.
Now I know we've been hurt, y'all, but still,
I smile,
come on.
even though I hurt, see, I smile.
Y'all feel that?
I know God is working, so I smile. Even though I've been it for a while,
Still,
I smile,
hallelujah.
smile. It's so hard to look up when you've been down. Sure would hate to see you give up now.
God's people,
You look so much better when you smile.
let's go.
For me,
Whoa.
can you just smile for me?
Whatever you're in right now,
Smile for me.
smile.
Can you just smile for me?
And my people say,
You look so much better when you You look so much better when you You look so much better when you
I say,
You look so much better when you
and while you waiting,
You look so much better when you
yeah, and while you praying,
You look so much better when you
look in the mirror.
You look so much better when you
Always remember,
look so much better when you smile.
come on.
I almost gave up.
I almost gave
Power
up,
that I can't
but that
explain
Holy Ghost power, y'all,
fell from heaven
came
like
down
a
from
shower
heaven.
down.
Hardships, difficulties,
Right now,
tears, storms. This is what I do.
I smile. Even though I hurt, see, I smile.
Boy, that feels good.
I know God is working, so I smile.
All things are working.
Even though I'm in it for a while,
Still,
I smile. Smile.
hallelujah.
So hard to look up when you've been down.
I know it's hard right now
Sure would hate to see you give up now.
because you're a winner.
You look so much better when you smile.
You look better.
So smile. You
Dallas,
look so much better when you
New Orleans,
You look so much better when you
come on, Cleveland,
You look so much better when you
Detroit,
look so much better when
yeah, Philly,
so much better when you
Jersey,
so much better when you
LA.
so much better when you
All my people say,
You look so much better when you smile.
see, I just don't want you to be happy, because then you gotta have something happen then. I want you to have joy, because can't nobody take that from you. I see you. Smile.
Okay, we're back. We're so glad you joined us today on Community Bell at WVTC Radio Detroit. You're getting some really, really good information today. History. I'm not going to recap all of it. I'll just go back a little bit of it. Ted Talbert, my brother, Emmy Award winning Ted Talbert, inducted into the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame, Ted Talbert. He was an excellent writer. And it's interesting because that's not what he set out to do. But God kind of sends you where you need to be, and you look up and there you are doing something, and you say, oh, okay. And so there you are. But again, won 5 Emmys. You see 2 of them sitting here right in front of you. 5 Emmys for his work in the world of documentaries from African American history. And just this past year, in September, he was inducted into the Detroit Sports Zone Hall of Fame for Detroit Public School people who have done outstanding things. And so he's a member of that, along with the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame. But wanted to just show you some other things that when I talk about some of the things that he's done. He wrote a book, and you're going to see it come up on the screen in a minute, but this book is called Everything You've Always Wanted to Know About Chitlins, but Were Afraid to Ask. And he would come up with some of the doggonedest things. And so he wrote this book. He got it published, and he sold them, and they sold. I mean, it was just quite incredible. But this is it. Everything you've always wanted to know about chitlins, but were afraid to ask. Now, some of the recipes in here come from my mother. And he would have Mom tell him what the recipes were, and he put them in there. And it's all sorts of little anecdotes, little jokes in this book. And the illustrations are really, really kind of funny. One says, a 10-pound bucket of chitlins left in 95-degree sunshine for 8 hours or more will develop its own personality. But I'm telling you, he just, the boy was really quite incredible, quite incredible. You will probably see a couple of things. I brought a couple. This picture is a picture of John Conyers and President Obama. John Conyers he received the brown bomber jacket probably back in the early 2000s. John Conyers presented the jacket to President Obama. And if you've ever seen any of President Obama's pictures on the one of the carriers, the Scott aircraft carriers, he's got that brown bomber jacket on, and I was just so thrilled to see him on that jacket, because Ted created the Brown Bomber Jacket Awards, and we presented one to President Obama, and he actually wore it. And one of these days I'll bring mine, because I have a brown bomber jacket too. I was presented with a brown bomber jacket back in the early 2000s, and I was thrilled to have been presented with one of those. Some of the other people who were presented with brown bomber jackets you might see will be Damon Keith. This is Damon Keith, my brother Ted, Bill Brooks. And a little bit more history. Of course, everybody knows who Damon Keith was. Damon just died recently. But Bill Brooks died the year before last, I believe. But Bill was an outstanding businessman and community person in this community. He was vice president of General Motors Corporation, went on to become the Jobs and Economic Development Secretary for President Bush. He was a Republican, but see, all people can't be defined just by Republican, Democrat. This was a really, really good man. Did wonderful things for this community, and Bill Brooks, just a great, great guy. Another photo here that you'll see this one later. This will be a little bit harder to see, but this one is Ted used to do a roast of people from all over the community. This happens to be one for Mel Farr. Mel Farr, again, was a football player. Great football player, and he owned Mel Farr Ford. And so this is the one when we did the roast of Mel Farr, and you'll see people in this picture. You'll see Mel Farr and his brother and the sons, and Lem Barney, who was another football player with Detroit. He and my brother were great friends, but Lem Barney is in the picture, and we did a roast of Lem Barney at one time also. I talked about Sonny Wilson earlier. Sonny was about my height, but Sonny was a powerful guy. If you look at the top picture, that's Sonny Wilson. Sonny owned they used to say it was the longest bar in Detroit. He owned a great restaurant and a hotel and a bowling alley. One of the great businessmen in Detroit. O'Neill Swanson, Mel Farr, and my brother Ted, great friends. This is O'Neill Swanson at the Mel Farr roast. So, you see these people, they really were real people, and they did great things. Great things. And one of these pictures is B. Buck. B. Buck is down here. B. Buck used to be a dancer at Sonny Wilson's theaters. She wrote a book. As a matter of fact, B. Buck's it has a street named after her in Paradise Valley, right off of Gratiot and Broadway downtown. So just sorts of wonderful history, everybody. The last thing I'm going to show you is for those of you who might have seen the picture, Green Book. If you don't know what the Green Book is, I have an original Green Book. It belonged to my brother. This is the original Detroit Green Book from 1945. And I want you to see how thick this is. These were all of the African American owned businesses in Detroit at the time. You see how thick this is? This is two-sided. This is an original Green Book. Green Books were given out by porters at train stations when African Americans would come into town, or if they and go to different cities, or each city had its own. They would give them the Green Book so that they would know where they could go and be safe, but where they could go and get their hair done, get their pharmaceuticals, get entertainment, drugstores. I mean, pictures. You name it. This is an original Green Book. So if those of you who saw the movie Green Book, yes, this is an original Green Book from 1945. So I just want to tell you that my brother, someone who was very special, very talented. As a matter of fact, when he passed, he was working on something everybody's going to recognize, because he was working on an upcoming television special about the numbers business. Now, everybody in the black community would know what I'm talking about when I say the numbers business. Policy. Actually, it was a lottery before it became the lottery, is what it was, everybody. And for those of you who might remember, there was a little bitty folded book that had a carbon copy, and you wrote your little numbers down. And I've got to tell you, my mother would play penny numbers. She'd have 50 little penny numbers down on that little sheet. And the policy person would come and pick up those numbers. And then the number would come out, and you get paid. Now, those number people put a whole lot of folks through college, gave a whole lot of folks jobs, did all sorts of things in the communities to support the community. And so when you hear about the numbers, he didn't get a chance to do his special on the numbers, but one day maybe somebody will. And I've got lots of information that they can have about the numbers game in Detroit, but in particular in Royal Oak Township, where we grew up, because Royal Oak Township was our home. We were all poor and didn't know it, but we were just happy as we could be, because we had a place to live, we had food, we had an excellent school system, we had people who cared about us. And talk about a village raising a child. That was the village. We had our own school system. Reverend Lonnie Cash was president of the school board. We had our own black teachers. We had our own community group. We had everything that we needed to be successful. And indeed, we were successful. So I'll go back and talk to you about Royal Oak Township. Busing before busing was the thing, because in those days we were bused from north from Royal Oak Township, from George Washington Carver, past Mumford, past McKenzie, past Central, past Highland Park, down to Northern High School. And all the young people who went to Northern High School from that community were successful. As I told you, Brother Ted became president of his graduating class. Brother Ted won the Detroit Police Youth Award. There was one given for each school, for a male and a female, for each school in each graduating class. He won in 1960 when he graduated from high school. 1961 rather. By the way, I won in 1962 when I graduated, and I was president of my graduating class too. So please don't think that just because something is all black is bad. This was the best thing that could have ever happened to us, because we were taught. We had people who loved us, who took care of us, who cared about us, and we succeeded. We succeeded against all odds. Royal Oak Township was self-contained, had its own police department, had its own fire department, had its own school system, and we did just fine. It was a great time. I am just glad I had an opportunity to share with you about my brother, Ted Talbert, Emmy Award-winning Ted Talbert. He has won 5 Emmys in the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame. Good guy, special guy. One of those folks that we need to celebrate and people need to know about. Thank you so much for being with us. This has been great. I enjoyed this. I'm going to find some other good people that you don't know about to bring to you also. Have a great time. Thank you for visiting with us today on the Community Bell Show, WVTC Detroit. One of the best places you want to be. You need to listen to us all day, every day. Come on now. See you next week. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to Community Bell with your host, former Wayne County Commissioner, Edna Bell. This broadcast was brought to you by WVTC Radio Detroit. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, our website, www.wvtcradio.com, or download our WVTC app from the Play Store for Android users and the App Store for iPhone users. If you've enjoyed this broadcast, tell a friend to tune in. We'll see you next Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern for the Community Bell Show, right here on WVTC Radio Detroit.
The views and opinions expressed on the previous broadcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of WVTC Radio Detroit, its advertisers, or affiliates.
WVTC Radio Detroit. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, our website, www.wvtcradio.com, or download our WVTC app from the Play Store for Android users and the App Store for iPhone users.